Hi, class, and welcome to Chapter 14 on the peripheral nervous system. Again, this lecture PowerPoint is extremely long, so I'm going to go through it um, rather quickly and point out the important things that I want you to remember because, again, this module is very lecture heavy, and I want to try to help you a little bit in your studying. So you should know what the peripheral nervous system is divided into, the sensory and motor divisions. The sensory inputs and motor outputs are subdivided into somatic and visceral, general and special, and nerves will allow your central nervous system to receive information and initiate action to and from the peripheral nervous system. So the general visceral motor part of the PNS is the autonomic nervous system. This is what happens automatically or subconsciously. And we divide the ANS into the parasympathetic and sympathetic divisions. And understanding this general flowchart and organization of the peripheral nervous system and the relationship to the central nervous system, which is in light gray, is extremely important. And outside of this graph, and what I go through in subsequent slides is very important. So this graph is extremely important to understand the organization of the PNS. And the following slides will kind of explain this organization a little bit better. So sensory receptors will pick up stimuli from the inside or outside of the body. Nerves and ganglia. Nerves are bundles of peripheral axons, and ganglia are clusters of peripheral neuronal cell bodies. Motor endings are axon boutons of motor neurons or endings which innervate effectors like muscle fibers and glands. So the structures that pick up sensory stimuli will initiate a signal in a sensory axon. And there's two main categories of sensory receptors: free nerve endings or complete receptor cells. The sensory receptors are also classified according to their function and structure. Exteroreceptors are sensitive to stimuli arising from outside the body, like touch, pressure, pain, and temperature. Interoreceptors receive stimuli from internal viscera or organs. They will be located in your digestive tract, the bladder, and lungs, and they will monitor a variety of stimuli like chemical concentrations, taste, stretching of tissues, and temperature. Proprioceptors are located in skeletal muscles, joints, and they monitor the degree of stretch and will send that input on the body movement to your central nervous system. Mechanoreceptors respond to mechanical forces. A baroreceptor is a special type of mechanoreceptor that monitors blood pressure, and thermoreceptors respond to temperature changes. A chemoreceptor responds to chemicals in solution. Photoreceptors respond to light. They're located in the eye. And nociceptors respond to harmful stimuli that result in pain. So general sensory receptors are widely distributed, and the nerve endings of sensory neurons will monitor touch, pressure, stretch, pain, temperature. General sensory receptors are divided into two groups: those that are free nerve endings or encapsulated or enclosed nerve endings. Free nerve endings monitor affective senses like pain and temperature. And there's two specialized types of free nerve endings like Merkel discs and hair follicle receptors. So here's a look at the general sensory receptors classified by their structure and function. The free nerve endings. Encapsulated nerve endings are enclosed in connective tissue, and these are the four main types. The tactile and lamellar are the two that you'll be responsible, or that you were responsible for knowing in lab. I think in lab exam 1, the Meissner's and Pacinian. Here are Meissner's corpuscles. They are in the dermal papillae, and they occur in sensitive hairless areas of the skin. They're rapidly adapting receptors for discriminative touch. And this is just a general graph of the encapsulated nerve. Lamellar corpuscles are sensitive to deeper pressure, so they're best suited to monitor vibration, and they will be located in the deeper layers of the skin, the subcutaneous layer. Bulbous, you don't need to know, but proprioceptors, now these are muscle spindles. That's the big one that I do want you to know. They monitor stretch, and there's three types. And the muscle spindles are the big one that measure the changing length of a muscle. Muscle spindles are important because you'll learn about them more in physiology as well. You have tendon organs and joint kinesthetic receptors that you don't need to know as much, but the muscle spindles will monitor the degree of stretch in a muscle, and they will help with the stretch reflex of the muscle. The next couple slides are all about the 12 cranial nerves. You don't need to know, they're all labeled with Roman numerals 1 to 12, and you don't need to know which cranial nerve is associated with each Roman numeral, but you do need to have a general understanding of what each cranial nerve does. And I'll always ask you for a cranial nerve in terms of what its name is, not the Roman numeral. This will definitely be a test question, what the vagus nerve does. The vagus nerve is the only cranial nerve that extends into the abdomen. The other cranial nerves that come from the brain and spinal cord all will go to areas of the face and neck. So here are the cranial nerves, and they're all in bold. The ones that I would ask you for in lab or lecture will be the ones that are easy to identify. So a lot of the cranial nerves down here that come off the midbrain, the brain stem are really hard to distinguish one from the other, but several of the cranial nerves are easy to distinguish, and I would focus your studying and location on them for lecture and lab. The trigeminal is a large cranial nerve, number 5. It divides into 3 pieces, so it's very thick and it comes off the pons. And then the optic nerves will cross each other in the optic chiasm, so that's an easy one to identify. And then the olfactory nerve is also an easy one to identify because it's the most anterior cranial nerve going to the nose. Other than that, I probably won't ask you which of the other cranial nerves are because a lot of them are close together and kind of hard to determine. All right, and then the next several slides go through all 12 cranial nerves. Some of them are easy to remember their function, like the olfactory nerve helps with the sense of smell. So I'm going to pass over these slides, but they go over all the cranial nerves. The optic nerve helps with vision. So you should know a very brief function associated with each cranial nerve. But again, I'm hoping that a lot of these will be easy to kind of pair together with their functions. Abducens, this is one of your quiz questions. It innervates the lateral rectus muscle, which abducts the eye. Facial nerves, the big one of the facial nerves is they innervate facial muscles, and they give sensory information from the taste buds on your tongue. So again, knowing general kind of function of a lot of these cranial nerves is important, but you don't need to know like the Roman numeral that is associated with each cranial nerve. So I'm going to kind of pass over these. The vagus nerve, again, is kind of important. It's a good test question because it's the only cranial nerve that exits kind of the head and neck region and goes to the thoracic and abdominal viscera. The accessory nerve, the big one about this one is it innervates your trapezius and sternocleidomastoid muscle. And then the hypoglossal, this glossal name has to do with tongue. So this one innervates a lot of your tongue muscles. Then your spinal nerves. So you have 31 pairs of spinal nerves, which contain thousands of nerve fibers, and they all connect to the spinal cord. They're all named for the point of tissue or point of issue from the spinal cord. So these are the spinal nerves, a posterior view, and the ones that come off the spinal cord. There's also a dorsal root of the spinal nerve, which contains all the sensory fibers. The cell bodies are located in the dorsal root ganglia, and the ventral root contains motor fibers. So you should know that the dorsal root contains sensory, and ventral or anterior root contains motor fibers. So here's a good picture of how a spinal cord is laid out. You can see the gray and white matter. You can see the dorsal root. So each of these coming off is a spinal nerve. And then the dorsal root goes in the posterior side containing sensory information. And the motor root comes off the anterior side of the spinal cord containing motor information. So here's a look, sensory information coming into the dorsal root, and then motor information coming out of the ventral or anterior root. A nerve plexus is a network of nerves, and there's 3 major nerve plexuses in the body. The cervical plexus is located deep to your SCM muscle. It's formed by ventral rami of the first 4 cervical nerves. Some innervate muscles of the anterior neck, The phrenic nerve is the most important because it will innervate your diaphragm, the most important muscle used for breathing. So here's the cervical plexus. So it's kind of a network of nerves that comes off of the spinal cord in the cervical region. And you can see the phrenic nerve in bold. The brachial plexus and innervation of the upper limb. So the brachial plexus lies in the neck, and the axilla or your armpit. It gives rise to the main nerves of the upper limb. And I won't ask you guys specifics about these plexuses besides maybe the phrenic nerve innervating the diaphragm, and then what the plexuses are, like the cervical, the brachial, but you won't need to know all the major branches. I include a lot of these nerves though, because in lab, there might be some nerves that you do need to know from the checklist. And these nerves, you can see where they innervate. So the radial nerve lies along the radius, the ulnar nerve lies along the ulna, and the median nerve goes down the middle. So you can see here the brachial plexus, a network of nerves that gives rise to the upper limb. And this is how it branches. But again, a lot of these I won't ask you guys very specifics, but I include a lot of the pictures in them in case you use this PowerPoint to study some of the nerves for lab. It's also kind of interesting to see where all of these nerves go and what parts of the bodies they innervate. So that's why I include them. The lumbar plexus is the third plexus, and it innervates the lower limb. The small branches innervate the posterior abdominal wall, and the main branches innervate the anterior thigh. A big one here is the femoral nerve will innervate the anterior thigh muscles, and the obturator nerve innervates the adductor muscles. So here's the lumbar plexus. And then there's a fourth plexus called the sacral plexus, and this is caudal or lower than the lumbar plexus. The sciatic nerve is the largest nerve, and this sciatic nerve is kind of an important one because it travels through the length of the leg. It's actually two nerves in kind of one sheath. The tibial nerve innervates the posterior limb, and the common fibular nerve innervates the muscles of the kind of lateral anterior part of the leg. The tibial nerve, you can see which parts it innervates, the common fibular nerve. And then again, a lot of these nerves I won't ask you specific questions on, but understanding that they come from the sacral plexus is important. So a dermatome is an area of the skin that's innervated by a cutaneous branch of a single spinal nerve. In the upper limb, the skin is supplied by nerves of the brachial plexus, and in the lower limb, they are supplied by lumbar nerves and sacral nerves. So dermatomes, we can divide the body into different regions, and we can kind of show here how different nerves, so example T2, this spinal nerve will have cutaneous receptors that go to this part of the kind of surface of the skin. C4, C6, you can see everywhere how each kind of area of the body, or cutaneous, that means closest to the skin surface, is innervated from a specific spinal nerve. And this can be important in diagnostic tools. So example, if someone has pain in an area of the body that's felt from the skin, it will correspond to a problem with this spinal nerve. And you can see the posterior view. And then a few disorders of the peripheral nervous system. There's just a couple that I want you to kind of know because they will be important whether you go into a healthcare related field or not. Shingles is a viral infection. It stems from chickenpox, and it's often brought on by stress, and it's usually experienced by people over age 50. A migraine headache can be related to a sensory innervation of the cerebral arteries, where the arteries dilate and compress and irritate sensory nerve endings. And then peripheral neuropathy is a pathological condition of peripheral nerves, and the symptoms of sensory nerve involvement like paresthesia, pain, burning, and loss of sensation. And some symptoms of motor nerve involvement are muscle weakness and paralysis. Some causes can be trauma, repetitive use, or a systemic disorder like HIV, diabetes, or vitamin B deficiency. So I know this was a short, quick PowerPoint, but I'm trying to focus on things that I just want you to know. We'll see you for the next chapter, and thanks for listening. Take care, everybody.